everybody. Rhubarb wine. It's about a week since I racked the wine from the bucket into this Demijohn. This has been working quite well during the week. I've been observing it. It's slowing up. It's still bubbling. I'll bring you in a moment and let you have a look and see what's going on. But it's got to a point now where I've noticed in the bottom of this Demijohn, there's quite a bit of sediment forming. I don't like to leave my wines and beers and things sitting on that sediment too long. It can possibly taint the flavours and affect your production. So what I'm intending to do now is to rack this, as we call it, which means removing it from this Demijohn into a clean, sterile Demijohn. I have one here. It's got some cleansing fluid in it. I've been swirling that around and keeping that clean. I'll rinse that out, and that will be the one I use to decant this fermenting wine into. I've got my steps here. I'll pop that on the steps and siphon it like I showed you previously. So I'll bring you in, I'll let you have a look and see. It's the colour's changed slightly. It's a little bit lighter at the top. As this is working, it clears and all this sediment is forming in the bottom. So we're going to rack this into another Demijohn. And before I do, I'll let you have a look and see what's happening here. Well, if you look very carefully at the surface of the wine inside the Demijohn, you can clearly see those little bubbles of carbon dioxide rising to the surface and bubbling off into that little area at the top of the Demijohn. Now it's this CO2 that you can see exiting through the bubbler attached to the top of the jar. And if I tilt you gradually up, you can come up here, you can see that area in the neck of the Demijohn is where the CO2 is accumulating. It builds up a bit of pressure. There's your bung in the top of the Demijohn, and through the bung is attached this plastic bubbler. That bubbler is partially filled with water. Now the idea is that water acts as a barrier, and all the nasties in the air, bits and pieces, bacteria, germs, goodness knows what else, cannot get down through that water into your wine. But the CO2 under pressure bubbles up and eventually exits through that little water section and is released into the air. Now this process has been going on, as I said, for about a week now, since we racked it from the bucket into the Demijohn. It's slowing down, as you can see whilst we're talking. It's only a few bubbles now and again. Here's one going now. Just watch that go. You'll see it bubble up through. There she goes. And the next one's forming behind. So that process has been going on for a week or so. But I'll lift you down to the bottom of the Demijohn and I'll show you what I mean by the sediment in the bottom. If we now look in the bottom of this Demijohn, I referred to the sediment in the bottom. Now, if you look carefully in the bottom, there is a light pink layer here. Now that is all the sort of settled crud that is a result of the yeast eating the sugar and producing alcohol, and also some other bits and pieces and what have you within the wine that is all part of that flavouring and colouring process. And it's all settled in the bottom here. Now the problem is, if you leave the wine sitting on this too long, this can actually start to decompose and it will affect the flavour of your wine. So what I like to do is every now and again I will rack off the wine from this Demijohn into a clean Demijohn, but leave this sediment in the bottom and dispose of it. So I will set up my siphoner, my siphon wand, with that little thing on the bottom to stop the sediment going in. And I'll show you how I now rack the wine from this Demijohn into the next one. Well, looking from back here, guys, is a similar setup to how I showed you before when I was racking from the bucket into the Demijohn. I've got my little set of steps here. There's a very clean and sterile Demijohn sitting on there. This is the one containing the rhubarb wine, and I'm going to use my little siphon kit, which is there, to decant this through the hose down into this Demijohn here. Well, the first thing I need to do is to carefully remove the bubbler and bung, there we go, from the top of this Demijohn. Now I will not reuse that, I will put a clean one in the clean Demijohn when I've finished. I showed you this little setup before, a flexible length of tubing and the rigid length of plastic tubing with the little cap on the end to stop the sediment from going in. And all I do is to carefully put that in the Demijohn, press it down until it's just at the bottom, at the front here, and this end will be down into the clean Demijohn. Well, all I've got to do now is make sure that I keep that little wand section in place, and I need to suck on the end of the hose, get the wine flowing into this Demijohn. Now it's this point you sometimes get that first taste of what your wine might be like. It's unavoidable, sometimes you do get a little mouthful and you get some idea of how sweet or how dry or what the flavour is as you're going along here. But we'll suck on the end of the tube, we'll start it flowing and see how we get on. Whoop! I nearly spilled it on the kitchen floor, guys. Now that actually tastes quite nice. That's got a lovely rhubarby, grapey, rosé flavour. That is really quite pleasant. Not too sweet, not too dry. So I think when this is ready for bottling, it's actually going to be quite pleasant. Well, as we saw before, the wine is slowly filling this Demijohn down here and is gradually lowering in this one. Now you can just make out the bottom of the siphon tube there. As this gets lower, I will tilt the jar forward in order to get all of that liquid into the next Demijohn. I'm just tipping it forward slightly, guys. I'm trying not to shake the bottom too much because we really do not want to get any of that nasty stuff into the next Demijohn. Doesn't matter if you get a little bit. The idea is to get as much clear liquid as possible. There she goes. I'll leave that little bit behind because it's starting to stir up the bottom. So that has now finished siphoning, and I can just unclip this top bit off. Right, I lift the hose out carefully, allowing the wine all to decant into that Demijohn there. This needs to be rinsed and sterilised. This can be disposed of, and this is what we want. We now have our wine in this clean, sterile Demijohn. Now, if you remember, this is still fermenting, so this will still be producing gas. It's still working, and we still need to keep a bubbler on the surface to protect it from any airborne problems. Alcohol is susceptible for picking up germs and other problems, and you don't want anything attacking this or ruining or spoiling your wine. So we use the air bubbler, as I've already shown you. Now this is the one I removed. It's a sort of elongated S shape. It's got a little cap on the surface, and you pop a bit of water in to about the halfway line, and the gases bubble through but nothing can enter back. Now, these are great when the wine is fermenting quite actively and quite vigorously. But what I do is when you get to this stage, and this is very gentle now, using a similar bung, I have an airlock like this one, and it comes in two components. It's got the main body of the thing, and you put a small amount of water in here, and this section fits on top. It's a much quieter apparatus. You don't hear all that lots of bubbling sound, gloop gloop, bubble bubble going on in the background. It's a much quieter apparatus, but it's really, what I found is it's more suited to the gentle fermentation as opposed to quite a vigorous fermentation. So at this point in time, I start using these ones. Now my hands are clean. This has already been sterilized. You insert it into the bung like so. Now I do need to put a little drop of water in this. If you excuse me guys, I'll just lean across you and just pop a small amount of water in there. I'm hoping it doesn't spill over. No, it's fine. And that goes on the top of there. And that little gadget now sits on the top of there. And the gas now bubbles through this. It goes up through, around and back up. It's neater and tidier, but as I said, I find they're not suited to a vigorous fermentation. The lids bubble off, all manner of things go wrong. So this is okay on this one for now. I may have put a little bit too much water in there. I might take a bit out in a minute. I've got a similar one on this decanter of wine here. This is a decanter of Shiraz style wine that I have made from a kit bought from a little homebrew outlet. Very much darker than the rhubarb. Now this is wine made from grape. This is wine made from a kit that's been formulated using grapes, as opposed to this one, which is made from fruit. Now fruit wines are different to the grape wines. However, I did add some grape juice to the rhubarb, if you remember, to give it that pink colour and to round off the flavour a little bit. Now I've already put my label on, rhubarb wine, and on the back I've written OG, which is the original gravity, which was 1.080 of this wine. Now when it's finished fermenting, I will use my hydrometer and check the final gravity, record that information. You take one from the other, you multiply by 0.129, and that will give you the ABV, the alcohol by volume. And I will record on here what that is. Now, with an original gravity of 1.080, if this ferments down to under 1, then the likelihood is this is going to have an ABV of approximately 12% or thereabouts. So quite a reasonably strength wine, and lovely flavour, as I've discovered during the siphoning. So I'll leave this now for another week or so to allow it to clear a lot more and finish fermenting. So I'll bring you back for another update on AJ's rhubarb wine. Well guys, thanks for popping in again. It's always nice to see you. We've got lots of homebrew going on here. I might show you a few more things at a later date. But for the purpose of this exercise, I wanted to show you the rhubarb wine. I find the rhubarb wine is a little bit more of a faff-on than normal wines, especially when you're using kits, which are very straightforward and simple to use. But your fruit wines take a little bit more and probably, in my experience, require a bit more racking off into clean demijohns before you get your final product. Well look, you take care of yourselves. Be safe, be happy, and come back and see us soon.